The courtroom door swung open, and Marcus Chen's world stopped breathing. The judge walked in black robes, silver hair pinned back with precision, and his hands went numb. That face. 3 weeks ago, she'd been standing in the rain beside a broken-down Mercedes Mascara, running phone-dead looking at him like he was her last hope. He'd given her his jacket, used his daughter's hair tie to secure a loose battery cable, refused the $100 bill she'd tried to press into his oil-stained hands. Now she held a gavel that could take his daughter away forever, and she was staring right back at him. Before we continue, comment below what city you're watching from. We love seeing how far these stories of second chances and unexpected grace can travel. Marcus Chen's hands shook as he gripped the steering wheel. Not from the cold, though November in Connecticut had teeth that bit through his worn jacket. Not from exhaustion, though he'd just finished a 12-hour shift at Morrison's Auto Repair, his third double this week. His hands shook because in exactly 21 days he'd stand in front of a judge who would decide if he was fit to keep raising his daughter alone. 21 days, 504 hours. Every single one of them counted. The windshield wipers beat their rhythm against the rain, thump swish, and Marcus's eyes burned. He'd been awake since 4:30 that morning. Breakfast with Sophie. Pack her lunch with the crusts cut off because she was going through that phase. Drop her at Brightwood Elementary by 7:45. Clock in at Morrison's by 8. Oil changes, brake jobs, a transmission replacement that fought him for 3 solid hours. His lower back screamed. His shoulders felt like someone had poured concrete into the joints. But he couldn't stop. Wouldn't stop. Because stopping meant thinking, and thinking meant drowning. "You're fighting an uphill battle, Mr. Chen," his court-appointed lawyer had said last Tuesday, her kind eyes full of that particular brand of pity that made Marcus want to put his fist through something. "Your ex-wife's legal team is well-funded, and the accusations are lies," Marcus had said. His voice had come out harder than he'd meant. Every single word. "I believe you, but proving it." She'd shaken her head. The system doesn't always see what's true. Sometimes it only sees what's documented. What was documented? 3 police calls to their old address, all initiated by his ex-wife, Teresa. What wasn't documented? That she'd made those calls herself during their worst fights, then told the officers Marcus had threatened her. He never had, never would. But the reports existed, and in family court reports had weight. What was documented? Teresa's new husband, Richard Hartwell, owned a 4-bedroom house in West Hartford with a pool and a guest cottage. What wasn't documented? That Richard looked at 7-year-old Sophie like she was a problem to be managed, not a child to be loved. What was documented? Marcus lived in a 2-bedroom apartment above a Korean grocery, worked long hours, had Sophie in after-school care until 6 most nights. What wasn't documented? That Sophie's reading level had jumped 2 grades since living with him. That she laughed more. That she'd stopped having nightmares. That she'd told Mrs. Pemberton, her teacher, "Daddy makes me feel safe." None of that would matter if the judge decided a bigger house and a stay-at-home stepfather looked better on paper than a struggling mechanic father who smelled like motor oil and worked himself half to death just to keep the lights on. The rain came harder now, turning the world outside into a blurred watercolor of headlights and neon. Marcus's ancient Toyota, a '98 Camry with 240,000 miles and a passenger door that didn't open from the inside, pushed through the weather. He should have been home 20 minutes ago. Mrs. Kim from the grocery downstairs was watching Sophie, and she never complained, but Marcus hated being late. Hated taking advantage of her kindness. His phone buzzed in the cup holder. He glanced down at the screen. Sophie. "Daddy, when are you coming home? Mrs. Kim is teaching me Korean words." Sophie. "I can say thank you and I love you." Sophie. "She says I'm a fast learner like you." Marcus's throat tightened. He thumbed out a reply at the next red light. "Almost home, sweetheart. Save some Korean words for me." 21 days. That's all the time he had left to prove he deserved to be her father. Not that biology had already decided that. Not that he'd been the one sitting beside her hospital bed when she had pneumonia at age 4, while Teresa was finding herself at a yoga retreat in Sedona. Not that he'd taught Sophie to tie her shoes, to ride a bike, to be kind, even when the world wasn't kind back. None of that mattered to the system. The system wanted documentation, wanted proof, wanted things that fit neatly into checkboxes and legal precedents. The system didn't care that Sophie had cried for 3 days straight the last time she'd spent a weekend at Teresa's new house. That she'd come back quiet, withdrawn, her spark dimmed. That she'd whispered to Marcus at bedtime, "Richard doesn't like when I talk too much. He says little girls should be seen and not heard." Marcus had held her until she fell asleep that night, his heart breaking into smaller and smaller pieces. The road stretched ahead, slick and dark. Route 44 heading east toward Hartford. Not much traffic this time of night, just the occasional semi hauling freight and late-shift workers like him trying to get home before they collapsed. That's when he saw the hazard lights. At first, they were just a blur of orange in the rain, pulsing weakly on the shoulder about a quarter-mile ahead. As Marcus got closer, details emerged. A dark Mercedes sedan looked like a newer model pulled off on the narrow shoulder. And beside it, a figure, definitely a woman from the silhouette, standing in the downpour, phone pressed to her ear. Marcus's foot eased off the gas. The Camry slowed. "Keep driving," the tired voice in his head said. "You're late. You're exhausted. She probably has roadside assistance. People with cars like that always do." But his mother's voice was louder, clearer, cutting through 20 years since her death. "Marcus Chen, you were raised better than to leave someone stranded. Character isn't convenient. It's what you do when no one's watching, and you have every reason to walk away." His jaw clenched. He had every reason to walk away. He was running on empty, physically, emotionally, financially. He needed to get home to Sophie. He needed to collapse into bed and steal whatever sleep he could before doing this all over again tomorrow. But the woman was alone. In the rain. At almost midnight on a Tuesday. And something about her posture, the way her shoulders curved inward, the defeated tilt of her head, reminded him of Sophie when she was overwhelmed and trying not to cry. Marcus pulled over behind the Mercedes, threw his hazards on. Sat there for 3 long seconds, rain hammering his roof, arguing with himself. Then he got out. The cold hit him first, rain immediately soaking through his Morrison's auto polo shirt. He was already damp from the humidity of the shop, and now he was getting properly drenched. He raised one hand as he approached, making sure she could see him clearly. Non-threatening. Open palms. Slow steps. The woman turned, and even through the rain and darkness, Marcus saw her body language shift. She took a step back toward her car. Her hand tightened on her phone. She was scared of him. Of course she was. Strange man approaching in the dark on a deserted stretch of road. All the worst news stories started this way. Marcus felt a familiar weariness settle over him, the exhaustion of knowing how he looked to certain people, how his worn clothes and oil-stained hands and tired face could be read as threat instead of help. He stopped about 10 feet back, kept his hands visible. "Ma'am," he called over the rain. "Car trouble. I'm a mechanic. Can I take a look?" She hesitated, studying him. The phone was still in her hand, and Marcus could see her thumb hovering near the screen. She was calculating, risk-weighing options. Smart woman. Then something in her face shifted, a decision made, and she nodded once, sharp and definite. "It just died," she said. Her voice was steady, professional, the kind of voice used to being heard. "Won't turn over. The engine just... nothing." Marcus nodded. "Mind if I pop your hood?" "Please," she said, and that single word carried more weight than it should have. Not just, "Please help me with my car," but "Please let this not be another disaster in what's clearly already been a terrible day." Marcus knew that feeling intimately. She reached inside the car, giving him a clear view of the interior, and yeah, this was money. Leather seats, that new car smell. Even from here, dashboard lit up like a spaceship and pulled the hood release. Marcus walked around front, lifted the hood, propped it with the rod. The rain poured down the back of his neck, soaked his collar, but he'd worked in worse conditions. His hands moved automatically, tracing connections, checking obvious failures first. Battery cables, alternator belt, spark plug wires. "How long ago did it die?" he called over his shoulder. "Maybe 10 minutes. I was driving, no warning, just..." She made a sound like air being let out of a tire. Everything shut off at once. "Did you hit anything? A pothole, a bump?" "There was a pretty bad pothole about a mile back. I didn't think I hit it that hard." Marcus smiled, though she couldn't see it. "You'd be surprised." His fingers found it. Within 90 seconds, the negative battery terminal had worked itself loose. The pothole had jarred it just enough to break the connection. Simple fix. The kind of thing that happens to aging cars with aging parts. "Got your problem," he announced, straightening. Battery terminal shook loose. "You got any tools?" "I know, I don't think so." "No worries, be right back." Marcus jogged back to his Camry, opened the passenger door from the outside, had to, since the inside handle had been broken for 3 years, and grabbed his personal toolkit from the footwell. Basic stuff: wrenches, screwdrivers, electrical tape, wire brush. The essentials that had saved him more times than he could count. When he got back to the Mercedes, the woman had moved closer, watching him work. She'd pushed wet hair out of her face, and for the first time, Marcus got a clear look at her. Mid-50s maybe. Professional haircut, expensive, even soaking wet. Sharp features, intelligent eyes. The kind of person who commanded rooms, who made decisions that mattered. And she was looking at him like he was an answer to prayer. "This is incredibly kind of you," she said, as Marcus tightened the terminal, his knuckles scraping against metal. "Most people would have kept driving." Marcus shrugged, working the wire brush around the terminal post to clean off corrosion. "Most people aren't mechanics, and most people weren't raised by Chinese mothers who'd come back to haunt them if they left someone stranded." She laughed, a surprised sound that broke through the rain, and Marcus found himself smiling. "Your battery's old?" he added, testing the connection, making sure it was solid. "See this corrosion? You should replace it soon. There's a 24-hour auto parts place about 3 miles up Jefferson Auto. Tell them Marcus Chen sent you, they'll treat you right." "Marcus Chen," she repeated like she was committing it to memory. "And you work at..." "Morrison's Auto Repair, over on Asylum Avenue." He straightened, wiping rain from his eyes. "Try starting it now." She slid into the driver's seat. More leather, more luxury. The kind of car that cost more than Marcus made in 2 years, and turned the key. The engine roared to life immediately, smooth and powerful dashboard lighting up like Christmas. The relief on her face was immediate and profound. Her whole body sagged, tension releasing. And Marcus understood. Sometimes the small disasters break you more than the big ones, because they're the last straw when you're already carrying too much. "Oh, thank God," she breathed. Then she was out of the car, standing in the rain again, digging in her purse. "What do I owe you? Seriously, name your price." Marcus was already backing toward his Camry, tools in hand. "Nothing, just glad I could help." "No, please." She pulled out her wallet, withdrew what looked like a $100 bill. "At least let me..." "Ma'am, I can't." Marcus held up his hands, tools dangling. "I didn't do it for money. I did it because you needed help, and I could give it. That's all." They stood there in the rain, facing each other across 8 feet of wet asphalt, and something passed between them. Recognition, maybe. Not of faces, but of something deeper. 2 people who understood what it meant to be exhausted, overwhelmed, doing their best in a world that didn't make it easy. "Can I at least know your name?" she asked, "so I can thank you properly." Marcus hesitated. He was so tired, so completely wrung out. And in 3 weeks, none of this would matter anyway. He'd either still be Sophie's father, or he wouldn't. And helping a stranger fix her car on a Tuesday night in November wouldn't change that outcome one way or another. But his mother had raised him to see people even in his darkest moments. Especially in his darkest moments. Marcus, he said. Marcus Chen. Thank you, Marcus Chen, she said, and her voice had gone softer, warmer, like he'd given her something more valuable than a battery terminal tightening. You probably just saved my entire night, maybe my entire week. If only you knew, Marcus thought, turning back to his Camry. If only you knew what kind of night I'm having, what kind of 3 weeks I'm facing. Drive safe, he called over his shoulder. And seriously, get that battery replaced. Don't wait. He climbed into his car, threw his toolkit on the passenger seat, and pulled back onto Route 44. In his rearview mirror, he watched the Mercedes's hazard lights click off, watched her pull smoothly back into traffic, heading the opposite direction. He never asked her name. Didn't matter, really. She was just another person he'd helped, another small moment of connection in a life that felt like it was falling apart. In 21 days, he'd stand in a courtroom and fight for his daughter. This random Tuesday night would be forgotten. Just one more shift, worked, one more drive home in the rain. Marcus Chen had no idea how wrong he was. He had no idea that the woman whose car he'd just fixed was Judge Catherine Walsh. And he had no idea that in 3 weeks, she would be the one deciding if he got to keep being Sophie's father. Marcus made it home 40 minutes later than he'd promised. The apartment was warm when he walked in, smelling like Mrs. Kim's homemade kimchi and the jasmine tea she always kept brewing. Sophie was curled up on their second-hand couch, her math homework spread across the coffee table, Mrs. Kim sitting beside her with patient hands guiding her pencil. "Daddy!" Sophie launched herself at him, and Marcus caught her automatically, his exhausted arms finding strength they shouldn't have had. She was getting bigger, 7 years old, and already up to his chest. Soon, she'd be too big to carry, too old to want to be held, and the thought made his chest ache. "Hey, baby girl," he murmured into her hair. "Sorry I'm late. There was—" He stopped to help someone. Mrs. Kim said, already gathering her things. She was 73, moved like someone 20 years younger, and had eyes that saw everything. "I can always tell. You have that look." "What look?" Sophie asked, pulling back to study his face. "The look that says your daddy did a good thing when he was already tired." Mrs. Kim patted Marcus's cheek with her small, strong hand. "Your mother would be proud. My Daniel would have done the same." Daniel Kim had died 6 years ago. Mrs. Kim still talked about him present tense sometimes, like he'd just stepped out for groceries. Marcus understood. Some absences were too large to fit into past tense. "Thank you for staying late," Marcus said, already reaching for his wallet. Mrs. Kim waved him off like she always did. "Sophie taught me the names of all the planets, and she ate all her dinner, even the vegetables. That's payment enough." She was already at the door, moving with the efficiency of someone who knew better than to let Marcus argue. "Get some sleep, both of you." The door closed, and suddenly the apartment felt both larger and smaller. Just him and Sophie. The way it had been for 2 years now, since Teresa had decided motherhood didn't fit her new life. "Did you really help someone?" Sophie asked, leading him to the couch, tugging on his hand like he was the child and she was the parent. "What happened?" Marcus sank into the cushions, every muscle screaming. "Lady's car broke down in the rain. Just needed a battery terminal tightened." "Did she say thank you?" "She did." "Did you charge her $1 million?" Sophie's eyes went wide with hope. "Because that would solve a lot of problems." Marcus's heart cracked. 7 years old, and she already knew they had money problems. He'd tried to shield her from it, but kids noticed things. Noticed when birthday parties got skipped because admission to Sky Zone cost $40 they didn't have. Noticed when dinner was rice and eggs 3 nights in a row. Noticed when Marcus said, "Maybe next month," about the art supplies she wanted. "I didn't charge her anything," Marcus said quietly. "She needed help. I could help. That's all." Sophie studied him with those dark, serious eyes that were too old for her face. "Mommy says you're too nice. She told Richard you're a pushover." Marcus felt something cold settle in his stomach. "When did she say that?" "Last weekend, when I was at their house." Sophie picked at a thread on her pajama pants. I wasn't supposed to hear. They were talking in the kitchen, and I was supposed to be watching TV, but I got thirsty. What else did they say? Sophie's face did something complicated, closed off, the way it always did when she came back from Teresa's house. Nothing. Can we watch our show now? Marcus wanted to push, wanted to know exactly what poison Teresa was dripping into their daughter's ears. But Sophie's shoulders had gone tight, and he recognized the signs. She was protecting him. 7 years old and already learning to carry secrets too heavy for her small frame. Yeah, he said, pulling her close. We can watch our show. They made it through half an episode of some animated series about magical horses before Sophie fell asleep against his side. Marcus carried her to bed, tucked her in with Mr. Whiskers, the stuffed cat she'd had since she was 2. Her room was tiny, barely big enough for a twin bed and a small dresser, but she'd decorated it with drawings she'd made, stars she'd cut out of construction paper, a growth chart they'd started together. This was her home. This cramped apartment above a grocery store. This was where she was happy, where she felt safe, where she could be loud and messy and 7. And in 21 days, a judge might decide it wasn't good enough. Marcus stood in her doorway for a long time, watching her breathe. The nightlight, shaped like a crescent moon, cast soft shadows across her face. She looked peaceful, innocent, completely unaware that the adults in her life were about to tear her world apart again. His phone buzzed, a text from his lawyer, Jennifer Reeves. Jennifer. Hearing moved up. 2 weeks from Friday. Judge Catherine Walsh presiding. I'll send over her background tomorrow. Marcus read the message 3 times. 2 weeks. Not 3. 13 days instead of 21. He walked to the kitchen, poured himself water he didn't drink, stood at the sink, staring at nothing. 13 days to get his case in order. 13 days to prove he was a fit parent despite living paycheck to paycheck, despite working 60-hour weeks, despite Teresa's legal team painting him as unstable and aggressive. His phone buzzed again. Jennifer. Walsh is fair, doesn't favor mothers automatically like some judges. She looks at evidence, at what's actually best for the child. That's good for us. Jennifer. Get some sleep. We'll prep this weekend. Marcus set the phone down. Catherine Walsh. He'd look her up tomorrow, see what he could find out about the woman who'd decide his fate. What her patterns were, what she valued, what might sway her. For now, he needed sleep. Needed to shut off his brain for 6 hours before doing this all over again. He checked on Sophie one more time, then collapsed into his own bed without bothering to undress. The ceiling had a water stain shaped like Australia. Marcus had been staring at it for 2 years, night after night, and he still hadn't fixed it. One more thing on the endless list of things he couldn't quite manage. His last thought before sleep took him, please, please let me keep her. 13 days later, Marcus stood outside Hartford County Family Court, wearing a suit he'd borrowed from Chen Wei, his uncle, who was 2 inches shorter and 30 pounds heavier. The jacket pulled across the shoulders. The pants were too short. He looked like a kid playing dress-up, and he knew it. Jennifer stood beside him, impeccable, in a gray pantsuit that probably cost more than his monthly rent. She'd been a public defender for 12 years, took cases like his because she believed in them, not because they paid well. Marcus didn't know what he'd done to deserve her, but he was grateful. Remember, she said, adjusting his collar for the 3rd time. Answer questions directly. Don't elaborate unless asked. Don't let Teresa's lawyer bait you into getting emotional. I'm not emotional. Jennifer gave him a look. Marcus, your hands are shaking. They were. He shoved them in his pockets. Where's Sophie? He asked. Your uncle's got her. They're getting breakfast at that diner she likes. The one with the silver dollar pancakes. Marcus nodded. He'd said goodbye to her that morning, tried to make it seem like no big deal, just a boring grown-up thing he had to do. She'd seen right through him, thrown her arms around his neck and whispered, "You're the best daddy. The judge will see that." He hoped she was right. He hoped Judge Catherine Walsh, whoever she was, would look past the paperwork and the accusations and see what actually mattered. "Ready?" Jennifer asked. Marcus wasn't. Would never be. But he nodded anyway. They walked through the heavy doors into the courthouse. Metal detectors, security guards, the smell of floor wax and stress. People everywhere, all of them fighting their own battles. All of them hoping the system would see them clearly. The courtroom was smaller than Marcus had imagined. Wood paneling, fluorescent lights, a space that felt both official and oddly mundane. Teresa was already there sitting beside her lawyer, a shark in a three-piece suit named Damian Cross, who probably charged more per hour than Marcus made in a week. Richard sat behind them, looking polished and smug. Teresa turned, caught Marcus's eye. Something flickered across her face. Not quite guilt, but close. They'd been married for 6 years. Had loved each other once, or at least Marcus had loved her. She'd loved the idea of him, maybe. The struggling artist vibe, the romantic notion of building a life from nothing. But when nothing stayed, nothing for too long, when Sophie came and real responsibility arrived, Teresa had realized she'd signed up for a fairy tale, but gotten real life instead. Marcus didn't hate her. Hating her would take energy he didn't have. He just wished she'd leave Sophie out of her quest for a better life. All rise for the Honorable Judge Catherine Walsh. The bailiff's voice cut through the murmur of conversation. Everyone stood. Marcus's heart hammered against his ribs. This was it. The moment everything changed. The door to the judge's chambers opened, and Marcus's entire world tilted sideways. She walked in wearing black robes, her silver hair pulled back in a neat bun, reading glasses perched on her nose as she reviewed a file. Professional, authoritative, every inch a judge. But Marcus knew that face, knew those eyes, had seen them lit by hazard lights in the pouring rain 2 weeks ago. The woman whose car he'd fixed. The woman who'd offered him $100 in gratitude. The woman whose name he'd never learned. She was Judge Catherine Walsh. Marcus's knees went weak. His vision tunneled. Beside him, Jennifer was sitting pulling at his sleeve, whispering something he couldn't hear over the roar of blood in his ears. This wasn't possible. This couldn't be happening. The odds, the sheer astronomical impossibility. Judge Walsh settled behind the bench, still reading the file. She hadn't looked up yet. Hadn't seen him. Marcus sat mechanically, his body following courtroom protocol, while his mind spun out into disbelief. She doesn't know, he thought desperately. She can't know. It was dark raining, she barely looked at me. But even as he thought it, he knew it was a lie. She'd looked at him, had studied his face when she'd asked his name, had committed it to memory the way people do when they're genuinely grateful. Marcus Chen. He'd told her his name, his full name, and now she was about to read it in the case file. Judge Walsh looked up, her eyes scanning the courtroom with practiced efficiency. They landed on Teresa's side first, a brief assessment, neutral and professional. Then they moved to Marcus's side, to Jennifer, to Marcus, and stopped. Marcus watched it happen in slow motion. The flicker of recognition, the slight widening of her eyes, the way her hand reaching for her gavel paused midair. She knew. She'd just realized. Their eyes locked across the courtroom, and in that fraction of a second, Marcus saw everything. Surprise, understanding, and something else, something that looked like calculation, like a rapid-fire series of decisions being made behind those intelligent eyes. Then her face went completely neutral, professional mask sliding into place like a steel door slamming shut. She looked down at her paperwork, cleared her throat. This is case number 2024, FC 7831, Chen versus Chen petition for primary custody modification. Her voice was steady, giving nothing away. Counsel, please state your appearances for the record. Damian Cross stood smooth as silk. Damian Cross for petitioner, Teresa Chen Hartwell, Your Honor. Jennifer Rose. Jennifer Reeves for respondent, Marcus Chen, Your Honor. Judge Walsh made notes, her face revealing nothing. I've reviewed the preliminary filings. This is a hearing to determine whether there's sufficient evidence to modify the current custody arrangement. Mr. Cross, you may begin. Marcus barely heard the next 10 minutes. Cross laid out Teresa's case with surgical precision. The police reports from their marriage carefully framed to make Marcus sound volatile. The financial instability, the long work hours, the cramped apartment. Sophie's statements twisted and taken out of context about feeling scared sometimes. Your Honor, Cross said, his voice dripping false concern. My client simply wants what's best for her daughter. Mr. Chen is not a bad man, but he's overwhelmed. Struggling. Unable to provide the stable, safe environment a 7-year-old child needs. Mrs. Chen Hartwell and her husband can offer Sophie a home with 2 parents' financial security and, most importantly, consistent supervision and emotional availability. Marcus's hands clenched under the table. Jennifer's hand covered his, squeezed once. A warning and a comfort. Ms. Reeves, Judge Walsh said. Your response? Jennifer stood, and Marcus had never loved another human being more than he did in that moment. Your Honor, what Mr. Cross calls struggle, I call dedication. Marcus Chen works 60 hours a week, not because he's irresponsible, but because he's the sole provider for his daughter. He doesn't have a wealthy spouse to fall back on. He makes every sacrifice necessary to ensure Sophie has food, shelter, clothing, and love. Jennifer's voice gained heat. The police reports Mr. Cross referenced all 3 calls were made by Ms. Chen during arguments. The responding officer's notes, which Mr. Cross conveniently omitted, state clearly that they found no evidence of threats or violence. Marcus was cooperative, calm, and concerned. Your Honor. Cross started to interrupt. Judge Walsh's hand came up. Let her finish. Jennifer nodded. Sophie's own teacher submitted a letter for our case file. Mrs. Pemberton states that in the 2 years since Marcus became primary custodian, Sophie's grades have improved dramatically. Her social behavior has stabilized. She's happy, engaged, thriving. The only time Mrs. Pemberton notices regression is after Sophie's visits to Ms. Chen Hartwell's home. Teresa shifted in her seat, uncomfortable. Your Honor, Jennifer continued. This isn't about what looks better on paper. This is about what's actually better for a child, and Sophie Chen is thriving with her father. Judge Walsh listened, her face still neutral. When Jennifer sat down, the judge leaned back in her chair, studying the people before her. I'm going to hear testimony before making any preliminary findings, she said finally. Mr. Cross, call your first witness. Teresa took the stand. She was beautiful. Marcus could admit that objectively. Always had been. She knew how to dress, how to speak, how to present herself. She cried at exactly the right moments during Cross's questions. Talked about how much she missed Sophie, how she'd made mistakes, but was ready to be a mother now, how concerned she was about Marcus's emotional state. He's angry, Teresa said, dabbing at her eyes with tissue. Always angry. I still worry about what that means for Sophie's emotional development. Marcus wanted to scream. He'd been angry, yes. Angry that she'd left without warning. Angry that she'd abandoned their daughter to find herself. Angry that she'd met Richard 3 months later and suddenly decided Sophie would make a nice accessory to her new perfect life. But he'd never, not once, shown that anger around Sophie. Jennifer cross-examined, gently dismantling Teresa's narrative. Ms. Chen Hartwell, how many of Sophie's parent-teacher conferences have you attended in the past 2 years? I don't recall exactly. Would it refresh your memory if I said the number was 0? Teresa's jaw tightened. I've been busy establishing my new life. Establishing your new life, Jennifer repeated. While Marcus attended every single conference, every school event, every doctor's appointment. Is that correct? He has more flexible hours. He works 60 hours a week. You don't work at all. Which of you truly has more flexible hours? Cross objected. Judge Walsh sustained it, but the point had been made. When Teresa stepped down, Richard took the stand. Marcus forced himself to watch to listen, even though everything in him wanted to walk out of this room and never come back. Richard spoke about his house, his stable career in pharmaceutical sales, his desire to be a father figure to Sophie. He was smooth-polished, said all the right things. Then Jennifer asked, "Mr. Hartwell, can you tell me Sophie's teacher's name?" Richard blinked. I'm not sure." "Her favorite color?" "Pink. Most girls like pink." "It's yellow," Jennifer said quietly. "What about her best friend's name?" "I haven't memorized every detail." "Her best friend is Emma Lee. They've been inseparable for 2 years. Emma's mother is one of Marcus's emergency contacts. They have playdates every Saturday." Jennifer paused. "You've had Sophie at your home how many times?" 6 weekends. 48 days. And you don't know her best friend's name." The courtroom was silent. Richard's polished exterior had cracked just slightly. Judge Walsh called a brief recess. Marcus stood on shaking legs and followed Jennifer into the hallway. "That went well," Jennifer said, but her eyes were worried. "Walsh is hard to read. I can't tell which way she's leaning." Marcus couldn't speak. Couldn't tell Jennifer that he knew exactly why Walsh was hard to read. That she was calculating not just legal factors, but personal ones. That she was probably sitting in her chambers right now, trying to decide if she should recuse herself, knowing that if she did, Marcus would get Judge Morrison. And Morrison was a nightmare. Everyone knew it. He rubber-stamped whatever the higher-earning parent wanted. Believed children needed mothers, not struggling fathers. If Walsh recused herself, Marcus would lose Sophie. It was that simple. But if she stayed on the case, if she ruled in his favor, and anyone ever found out about that night on Route 44, she'd lose her career, possibly her license to practice law. Marcus watched Jennifer disappear into the restroom, her heels clicking against tile, and found himself alone in the courthouse hallway. Other families waited on benches, their own dramas playing out in whispered conversations and tissue-dampened eyes. A young mother bounced a toddler on her knee. An older man sat with his head in his hands. Everyone here was fighting for something they couldn't bear to lose. Marcus walked to the water fountain, drank without tasting, straightened without feeling steadier. His reflection stared back at him from the polished window of a courtroom door. He looked exhausted, defeated. Nothing like the man who'd confidently fixed a stranger's car in the rain 2 weeks ago. That version of Marcus had believed in simple acts of kindness, had believed that doing the right thing mattered, that character counted for something. This version knew better, knew that the woman he'd helped now sat in chambers making impossible calculations, trying to decide if saving him meant destroying herself. He should find a way to tell her it was okay. That she should recuse herself, let Morrison take the case. That Marcus would rather lose knowing she'd protected her career than win knowing she'd sacrificed everything. But that was a lie, and Marcus was tired of lying to himself. He wanted to win, wanted Sophie, would take any advantage the universe offered, even this impossible, unethical, completely wrong advantage. What did that make him? The restroom door opened. Jennifer emerged, checked her phone, frowned. "Walsh is taking longer than usual," she said. "Recess was supposed to be 15 minutes. We're at 30. Marcus's stomach twisted. She was making her decision. Right now, behind that closed door, Catherine Walsh was choosing between her principles and a man she'd met for 5 minutes in a rainstorm. What happens if she recuses? Marcus asked, though he already knew the answer. Jennifer's face went carefully neutral. We'd get whoever's next in rotation, probably Morrison. And Morrison would give Sophie to Teresa. Marcus. Wouldn't he? Jennifer's silence was answer enough. The bailiff emerged from the courtroom, called them back inside. Marcus's legs felt like water as he walked through those doors, as he took his seat at the defense table, as he watched Judge Catherine Walsh return to the bench. She didn't look at him, not once. Her eyes stayed fixed on her paperwork on some point above the courtroom, on anything except the man whose car battery she'd once desperately needed fixed. I've reviewed the testimony and evidence presented thus far, Walsh said, her voice measured and professional. Before we proceed to the respondent's witnesses, I want to address a procedural matter. Marcus stopped breathing. This was it. She was going to recuse herself, was going to hand him over to Morrison and live with her conscience intact. He couldn't blame her, wouldn't blame her. She had a career, a reputation, a life she'd built over decades. What was one custody case compared to all that? What was Sophie compared to all that? Walsh's fingers drummed once against her desk. A tiny gesture barely noticeable, but Marcus caught it. Saw the tension in her shoulders, the way her jaw was set just slightly too tight. "I've been a judge for 17 years," she said, and something in her voice made the entire courtroom go still. "In that time, I've presided over hundreds of custody cases. I've seen good parents and bad parents. I've seen people who should never have had children and people who'd die for them. I've seen the system work exactly as it should, and I've seen it fail spectacularly." Cross shifted in his seat. Teresa leaned forward, sensing something. "The law," Walsh continued, "is supposed to be blind, impartial. But the law is administered by people, and people are neither blind nor impartial. We bring our experiences, our biases, our understanding of the world into every decision we make." She paused, looked down at her notes. "The question is whether we're honest about that, or whether we pretend we're something we're not." Marcus had no idea where this was going. Beside him, Jennifer had gone very still, like she was afraid any movement might shatter whatever was happening. "I'm going to hear all witnesses before making any rulings," Walsh said finally. "Ms. Reeves, call your first witness." She wasn't recusing herself. Marcus felt something crack open in his chest. Relief, gratitude, terror, all of it tangled together. She was staying, was keeping his case, was risking everything for reasons he couldn't begin to understand. Their eyes met for a fraction of a second. Walsh's expression gave nothing away, but Marcus thought he saw something there. A flicker of determination, of quiet defiance against a system that demanded perfection instead of justice. Then she looked away, and the moment broke. Jennifer stood. The respondent calls Marcus Chen to the stand. Marcus's legs were unsteady as he walked to the witness box. The bailiff administered the oath, and Marcus swore to tell the truth. The whole truth, and nothing but the truth, and wondered how anyone ever managed that in a courtroom. Truth was complicated. Truth was messy. Truth was Marcus loving his daughter more than breathing, but also being scared every single day that he wasn't enough. Jennifer's questions were gentle, designed to let him tell his story. Marcus talked about Sophie's birth, how he'd been the first one to hold her because Teresa had complications and couldn't. How Sophie had been jaundiced and tiny, and the most beautiful thing he'd ever seen. How he'd sat beside her incubator for 3 days straight, talking to her through the plastic, promising her the world. "Tell us about your daily routine with Sophie," Jennifer prompted. "I wake up at 5, Marcus said. Make breakfast. Usually eggs and toast, sometimes pancakes if we have time. Sophie likes helping crack the eggs. She's not very good at it, yet gets shell everywhere, but I let her do it anyway because she's proud when she succeeds." He smiled, couldn't help it. "I pack her lunch. She only eats sandwiches if they're cut diagonal, not straight across. Says triangles taste better. I don't understand it, but that's the rule." Someone in the gallery laughed softly. Even Walsh's mouth twitched slightly. "We walk to school together when I have morning shift. It's 6 blocks. Sophie counts the cracks in the sidewalk, tries to avoid stepping on them. Says it's bad luck. Got that from some rhyme her friend Emma taught her." Marcus's voice caught. "On afternoons when I work late, Mrs. Kim watches her. They do homework together, practice Korean bake cookies. Sophie comes home smelling like cinnamon and ginger. Those are my favorite nights." "What about weekends?" "Saturdays we sleep in, then go to the library. Sophie loves the library. She gets 7 books every week, the maximum allowed on her card. Reads them all by Friday. Her favorite section is animals, but lately she's been interested in space. Wants to be an astronaut." Marcus paused. Sundays we do laundry at the mat down the street. She brings homework or she draws. She's really talented. Draws these elaborate pictures of families, always includes Mr. Whiskers, her stuffed cat. Says he's part of the family too. Does she ever talk about her mother? Jennifer asked carefully. Marcus chose his words with precision. She asks sometimes, why mommy left, if it was her fault. I tell her it's not that adults make complicated decisions, that her mother loves her, but wasn't ready to be a parent. I don't know if that's true, but I don't want Sophie growing up thinking she wasn't wanted. Teresa was crying now, Marcus noticed. Real tears, not the calculated ones from earlier. Maybe she did love Sophie in whatever broken way she was capable of. But love wasn't enough. Love without presence, without sacrifice, without the daily grinding work of showing up, that wasn't the kind of love that raised a child. Cross's cross-examination was brutal. He hammered at Marcus's finances, his work hours, the cramped apartment, every police report, every moment of struggle. Made it sound like Marcus was barely keeping his head above water, drowning in responsibility he couldn't handle. Mr. Chen, you work 60 hours a week, correct? Yes. That's 12-hour days, 5 days a week. Sometimes 6 days. Leaving Sophie with neighbors, with after-school programs, with anyone who'll watch her. With people who care about her, Marcus corrected. Mrs. Kim has been like a grandmother to Sophie. The after-school program is run by certified teachers. Sophie's never alone, never unsupervised. But she is often without her father. I'm working to support her, to keep a roof over our heads, food on the table. I'm doing what parents do. What about what children need, Mr. Chen? Cross leaned in. Don't children need parents who are present, who aren't exhausted, who can afford to give them opportunities beyond the bare minimum? Marcus felt anger surge hot and sharp. Sophie has everything she needs. Maybe not everything she wants, but she's fed. She's safe. She's loved. She does well in school. She has friends. She's happy. His voice rose despite himself. You want to talk about opportunities? I taught her to read. I sit with her every night and help with homework. I take her to the library, the park, the free concerts in summer. We don't have money for Sky Zone or fancy vacations, but she's not suffering. She's thriving. Are you angry right now, Mr. Chen? The question was a trap. Marcus saw it coming but couldn't stop himself from walking into it. I'm frustrated, he said carefully. You're trying to make it sound like poverty equals bad parenting. Like struggling means I don't love my daughter enough. That's not true. That's never been true. But you are angry. I'm a father fighting for his child. Yes, I'm angry. Angry that we're even here. Angry that my ex-wife abandoned Sophie for 2 years and now wants her back like she's a purse she forgot at a friend's house. Angry that having money somehow makes her a better parent than having love. Cross smiled. He'd gotten what he wanted. No further questions, Your Honor. Marcus stepped down, feeling like he'd failed some crucial test. Jennifer touched his arm as he sat, whispered, You did fine. Trust me. But Marcus couldn't trust anything anymore. The courtroom felt like quicksand, every movement dragging him deeper. Jennifer called Mrs. Kim next. The older woman walked to the stand with her chin high, and Marcus loved her fiercely in that moment. She wore her nicest dress, the navy one she saved for church, and spoke in accented but clear English about Sophie's routine, her personality, her happiness. She is good child, Mrs. Kim said firmly. Smart. Kind. She helped me in store, sometimes stock shelves, practice counting. She tell me about school, about books she read. She talk about father constantly. Daddy teach me this, Daddy say that. Every sentence, Daddy. That is love. What about when Sophie returns from visits with her mother? Jennifer asked. Mrs. Kim's face clouded. She is different. Quiet. Takes 2-3 days before she is herself again. Once she come back and cry all evening. Say she miss her daddy, say Richard tell her she too loud. What kind of man tell 7-year-old child she too loud? Children are supposed to be loud. That is how you know they are happy. Cross tried to rattle her on cross-examination, but Mrs. Kim was unmovable. She'd survived immigrating to America with nothing, building a business from scratch, losing her husband, and continuing alone. Some corporate lawyer from Hartford wasn't going to intimidate her. Mrs. Kim, you're paid to watch Sophie, correct? I am paid, yes. So this isn't purely altruistic. You have a financial interest in maintaining the current arrangement. Mrs. Kim's eyes flashed. Marcus, pay me $20 a week. $20. You know what childcare cost? $50, $60 per day. I do this because Sophie is good child and Marcus is good man. You want to know about money. Talk about what $20 buy versus what $1,000 lawyer buy. One buy nothing. One buy chance to take child from loving father. Even Walsh had to hide a smile at that. Sophie's teacher, Mrs. Pemberton, testified next. She was young, maybe 30, with kind eyes and a folder full of Sophie's work. She showed the court drawings Sophie had made writing samples that demonstrated advanced skills test scores that had improved dramatically. Sophie is one of my brightest students, Mrs. Pemberton said. But more than that, she's empathetic. When another child is struggling, Sophie notices. She'll share her supplies without being asked. She'll include kids who are left out. That kind of character doesn't come from nowhere. It's modeled at home. Have you observed changes in Sophie after visits with her mother? Jennifer asked. Mrs. Pemberton nodded. Yes, she's withdrawn. Won't participate in class discussions. Her artwork becomes darker, less cheerful. It takes several days for her to readjust. Have you discussed this with Mr. Chen? I have. He's always responsive, always concerned. Asks what he can do to help, how he can support her. He attends every conference, every school event. He volunteered to chaperone our field trip to the Science Museum, even though it meant losing a day's wages. Mrs. Pemberton looked directly at Teresa. In 3 years of teaching Sophie, her mother has attended exactly one event, the winter holiday concert last year. She left before it ended. Teresa's face went red. Richard whispered something to her that Marcus couldn't hear. The testimonies continued. Marcus's supervisor from Morrison's talking about his work ethic and reliability. The director from Sophie's after-school program describing her as well-adjusted and engaged. Jennifer had built a fortress of evidence, brick by brick, testimony by testimony. But Marcus kept watching Walsh, trying to read her expression, looking for some sign of which way she was leaning. She gave nothing away. Just took notes, asked occasional clarifying questions, maintained that impenetrable professional mask. When the last witness stepped down, Walsh called for final arguments. Cross went first. His voice smooth and persuasive as he painted a picture of 2 homes, one offering stability, security opportunity, and one offering struggle, uncertainty. Just enough. He never said Marcus was a bad father. Didn't have to. Just made it clear that Teresa could offer more, and in family court more looked like better. Then Jennifer stood, and Marcus saw why she'd been doing this work for 12 years, despite the low pay and emotional toll. Your Honor, she began. Mr. Cross has spent the last 2 hours telling you what money can buy. A bigger house, a stay-at-home parent, extracurricular activities, private tutors. All things that sound good on paper. But this case isn't about paper. It's about a child. A real, living, breathing 7-year-old girl named Sophie Chen. Jennifer walked toward the center of the courtroom, commanding attention without demanding it. Sophie doesn't need a bigger house. She needs the home where she feels safe. She doesn't need a stay-at-home parent who's emotionally absent. She needs the working parent who shows up exhausted, but still helps with homework. She doesn't need expensive activities. She needs the library trips and park visits and sidewalk crack counting that make her feel seen and loved and valued. Marcus's eyes burned. The petitioner abandoned this child for 2 years. Jennifer continued, her voice gaining strength. Not because she was sick, not because she was incapable, but because motherhood was inconvenient, because Sophie didn't fit into the life she wanted to build. And now that life is built, now that she has the house and the husband and the picture-perfect setup, suddenly she wants Sophie back. like a final piece of furniture to complete the room. "Objection," Cross said. "Counsel is making inflammatory statements." "Overruled," Walsh said quietly. "Continue, Ms. Reeves." Jennifer nodded. Marcus Chen has been Sophie's constant. When she was sick, he was there. When she learned to ride a bike, he was there. When she had nightmares, he was there. He's not perfect. He works too much because he has to. He lives in a small apartment because that's what he can afford. But he shows up. Every single day he shows up. And that matters more than square footage or salary or any other metric we use to measure parenting. She turned to face Walsh directly. "Your Honor, you've heard testimony from Sophie's teacher, her caregiver, her father's employer. Everyone who actually knows this child, who sees her regularly, who understands her daily life, they all say the same thing. She's happy. She's thriving. She's exactly where she needs to be. The only people arguing otherwise are the ones who want to change that arrangement for their own benefit." Jennifer paused, let the silence stretch. Sophie Chen has one parent who sacrifices everything for her, and one parent who wants her when it's convenient. This court's job is to determine which one serves Sophie's best interests. I trust you'll make the right decision. She sat down. Marcus wanted to applaud, to thank her, to do something to acknowledge what she'd just done. But the courtroom was silent. Everyone waiting for Walsh's response. Walsh steepled her fingers, looked out at the assembled people. At Teresa and Richard, at Marcus and Jennifer, at the gallery of social workers and family members and courthouse regulars who came to watch other people's lives fall apart or come together. "I'm going to take this case under advisement," she said finally. "I want to review all testimony and evidence before making a ruling. I'll issue my decision within 2 weeks. Court is adjourned." The gavel came down. 2 weeks. 14 more days of not knowing, of wondering, of watching Sophie and trying not to let her see his fear. People stood gathered, belongings began filing out. Marcus sat frozen, unable to move. Jennifer touched his shoulder. 2 weeks is good," she said. "It means she's taking it seriously, really considering everything." "Or it means she can't decide," Marcus said. "Means we're 50-50. Have faith." Faith. Marcus had been running on faith for 2 years. Wasn't sure he had any left. Teresa walked past their table, Richard's hand on the small of her back. She glanced at Marcus, opened her mouth like she wanted to say something, then closed it and kept walking. Whatever guilt or regret or explanation she'd been considering wasn't enough to actually voice. The courtroom emptied until it was just Marcus, Jennifer, and the bailiff cleaning up paperwork. Marcus finally stood, his legs stiff, his body aching like he'd been hit by a truck. "Go home," Jennifer said gently. "Hug your daughter. Make dinner. Watch your show. Try to breathe. If I lose, you won't. But if I do, Marcus," Jennifer's voice went firm, "one day at a time. That's all any of us can do." Marcus nodded, not believing her but grateful for the attempt. He walked out of the courthouse into afternoon sunlight that felt too bright, too cheerful for the darkness churning inside him. His phone buzzed with a text from Uncle Wei. "Wei, Sophie wants ice cream. Took her to that place she likes. Come when ready." Marcus drove to the ice cream shop on autopilot. Found Sophie and Wei at an outdoor table. Sophie, with chocolate chip cookie dough in a waffle cone, her face smeared with melted ice cream, her smile wide and innocent. "Daddy?" She launched at him, and Marcus caught her, held her tight, breathed in the scent of her shampoo and ice cream and childhood. "Hey, baby girl." "Uncle Wei says I can get 2 scoops because it's a special day." Sophie pulled back, studied his face with those 2 wise eyes. "Is it a special day?" "Every day with you is special," Marcus said, which was true and also an evasion. Sophie saw through it but didn't push. Just took his hand, led him to the table, offered him a bite of her ice cream. Marcus took it, tasted nothing, smiled anyway. Wei gave him a look that said they'd talk later. Marcus nodded. Later. When Sophie was asleep, and Marcus could fall apart without an audience. For now, he sat in the sunshine with his daughter, watched her swing her legs, and talk about the books she'd read that week, and pretended everything was fine. Pretended his entire world wasn't balanced on the edge of a gavel. Pretended that somewhere in Hartford, Judge Catherine Walsh wasn't sitting in her chambers trying to decide if the man who'd helped her in the rain deserved to keep being a father. That night, after Sophie was asleep and Wei had gone home, Marcus stood in his tiny kitchen and let himself break. Just for a moment, just long enough to press his palms against the counter and breathe through the terror that threatened to swallow him whole. His phone sat on the counter, dark and silent. No messages, no updates, nothing from Jennifer, nothing from the court, nothing from the universe offering reassurance or hope. Marcus opened his laptop, typed Judge Catherine Walsh into the search bar. Her official biography appeared first. Born in Boston. Graduated from Yale Law. 15 years as a prosecutor before appointment to the bench. Married, widowed, young, no children. Known for being fair but tough. High rate of rulings upheld on appeal, which meant she got it right more often than not. There were articles about cases she'd presided over. Interviews where she talked about justice and the law and the responsibility judges carried. Photos from legal conferences, charity events, the formal portraits all judges had taken. And Marcus searched for something in those images, some hint of the woman who'd stood in the rain and looked at him with gratitude. Some evidence that the person who'd offered him $100 for 10 minutes of work was the same person who now held Sophie's fate in her hands. He found nothing. The Catherine Walsh in these photos was polished, professional, untouchable. Not someone who got stranded on rainy highways or needed help from mechanics in borrowed suits. Marcus closed the laptop, checked on Sophie one more time. She slept peacefully. Mr. Whiskers tucked under her arm, her breathing steady and deep. Unaware that in 2 weeks everything might change. He wanted to wake her, to run, to disappear to some place where courts and custody battles didn't exist. Mexico, maybe. Or Canada. Somewhere they could start over, be anonymous. Build a life without Teresa or Richard, or judges who recognized him from chance encounters. But that was fantasy. Reality was this apartment, this life, this weight. Reality was trusting a system that didn't always get it right, and hoping that this time somehow it would see clearly. Marcus's last thought before exhausted sleep finally claimed him was a prayer to no one in particular. Please let her remember. Please let her remember what it means to need help and have someone stop. Catherine Walsh sat in her chambers long after everyone else had left the courthouse. The building had that particular silence that came after 5 o'clock, when the fluorescent lights hummed louder and footsteps echoed differently. Her clerk had gone home. The bailiff had wished her good night an hour ago. Even the security guard had stopped checking on her. She should go home. Should stop staring at the Chen custody file spread across her desk. Should stop seeing Marcus Chen's face every time she closed her eyes. But she couldn't move. Couldn't think past the impossible situation she'd found herself in. Her phone buzzed. A text from her sister Margaret, who lived in Providence and called every Thursday like clockwork. Margaret, dinner Sunday, I'm making that pot roast you love. Catherine stared at the message, tried to remember what normal life felt like. Sunday dinners. Pot roast. Conversations about Margaret's book club and neighborhood gossip. A world where the hardest decision was whether to have seconds. Catherine. Maybe. Have a difficult case. Might need to work. Margaret. You always have difficult cases. That's why you're good at your job. Come anyway. Catherine set the phone down without responding. She pulled off her reading glasses, rubbed the bridge of her nose where they always left a mark. 17 years on the bench. Hundreds of custody cases. Thousands of decisions that altered lives, shaped futures, determined who got to be a parent and who didn't. She'd always believed in the law, believed in the system and precedent, in the carefully constructed framework that kept judges from making decisions based on emotion or bias or personal connection, The law was supposed to be blind for a reason. Impartiality wasn't just an ideal, it was the foundation everything else was built on. And she'd just violated every principle she'd spent her career upholding. The ethical thing would have been to recuse herself the moment she'd recognized Marcus Chen. The second their eyes had met across that courtroom, she should have called both attorneys to chambers, explained the conflict, handed the case to Morrison. But she hadn't. Had sat there behind her bench, mind racing through possibilities and consequences, and made a choice that could end her career. Because Morrison would destroy Marcus Chen. Catherine knew this with absolute certainty. She'd sat through Morrison's decisions, watched him rule based on optics instead of evidence, on wealth instead of character. He believed children needed two-parent households and financial stability above all else. Believed working fathers couldn't possibly parent as well as stay-at-home mothers. His custody decisions followed a pattern so predictable you could set your watch by them. If she'd recused herself, Sophie Chen would be living with Teresa Hartwell by the end of the month. No question, no possibility otherwise. And that would be wrong. So completely fundamentally wrong that Catherine's conscience wouldn't allow it. She'd read the file 3 times before the hearing. Had studied every police report, every financial document, every piece of evidence Cross had submitted. The reports were troubling at first glance. 3 domestic disturbance calls painted a picture of volatility and potential danger. But Catherine had learned long ago to read between the lines. All 3 calls had been placed by Teresa. All 3 responding officers had noted that Marcus was calm, cooperative, showed no signs of aggression. One officer had written in his notes, "Husband appears exhausted and frustrated, but not threatening. Wife appeared to be escalating situation deliberately." That note hadn't made it into Cross's summary of evidence. Interesting. The financial documents showed struggle. Yes. Marcus lived paycheck to paycheck. But the spending pattern told a story Cross hadn't bothered to explore. Rent always paid on time. Utilities never shut off. Regular payments to Brightwood Elementary for after-school care. Frequent small charges at bookstores and the library's paid programming. Every dollar Marcus earned went toward Sophie's well-being and stability. Teresa's finances, by contrast, showed spa visits and shopping trips and expensive dinners. Nothing wrong with that when you had the money. But it raised questions about priorities. About who was actually invested in Sophie's daily life versus who wanted the appearance of being a good mother. The teacher's letter had been the most damning evidence for Teresa's case, though Cross had tried to spin it otherwise. Mrs. Pemberton had written with careful precision about Sophie's regression after visits to her mother's home. About how the child would withdraw, become quiet, lose the spark that made her such a joy in the classroom. And how it took several days of Marcus's patient, consistent presence to bring Sophie back to herself. That was the evidence. That was what the law said mattered: the best interests of the child determined by facts and testimony and documented patterns. But Catherine's decision was complicated by something else entirely. By rain and hazard lights and a man who'd stopped to help when he had every reason to keep driving. She'd been so angry that night. The case she'd been working had fallen apart spectacularly, a prosecution she'd spent 6 months preparing only to have critical evidence excluded on a technicality. She'd stayed late at the courthouse, arguing motions, trying to salvage something from the wreckage. By the time she'd left, it was past 10 and pouring rain, and she'd been running on coffee and frustration. The car dying had felt like the universe's final joke. Catherine Walsh, who prided herself on preparedness and control, stranded on the side of Route 44 with a dead phone battery and a car that wouldn't start. She'd tried calling for roadside assistance, but her phone had died mid-conversation. She'd stood in the rain feeling more helpless than she had since she was 25 and newly widowed, drowning in grief and law school debt. Then, Marcus Chen had pulled over. She'd been frightened at first. Of course she had. Strange man, dark road, she was alone and vulnerable. But something about his posture, the way he'd kept his distance and raised his hands, had made her reconsider. And when he'd spoken soft and respectful and genuinely concerned, she'd made the choice to trust him. He'd fixed her car in under 5 minutes, had refused payment, had smiled wearily and said his mother would haunt him if he left someone stranded, and Catherine had seen in that moment exactly who Marcus Chen was. Someone who did the right thing, even when it cost him. Even when he was clearly exhausted and struggling, and had his own problems weighing him down. She hadn't known about the custody battle then, hadn't known his name would cross her desk 2 weeks later, but she'd known he was a good person, had recognized character when she saw it. And now she was supposed to ignore that knowledge. Supposed to pretend she'd never met him, never seen him at his most vulnerable, and witnessed him choose kindness anyway. Supposed to make her decision based solely on courtroom evidence. But how could she? How could anyone? Catherine stood paced the length of her chambers. Photos lined one wall, her swearing-in ceremony, her and Margaret at Yale graduation. One precious photo of James before the cancer took him. Reminders of the life she'd built, the career she'd earned through decades of hard work and careful ethical practice. One decision. That's all it would take to lose everything. If anyone found out about that night on Route 44, if Teresa's lawyers discovered the connection, they'd appeal immediately. Catherine would be investigated, probably removed from the bench, possibly disbarred. Her entire legacy reduced to one moment of compromised judgment. She should recuse herself. Even now she could call both attorneys in the morning, explain the situation, let Morrison take over. It wasn't too late to salvage her integrity. Except it was too late for Marcus, for Sophie. Once Morrison got the case, the outcome was predetermined. Catherine returned to her desk, opened the file again. Sophie Chen's school photo stared up at her, a 7-year-old with dark eyes and a gap-toothed smile, wearing a yellow dress and looking directly at the camera with complete trust that the world would be kind to her. This child deserved better than Morrison's bias. Deserved a judge who would actually look at the evidence, who would see past surface appearances to the truth underneath. This child deserved justice. Catherine closed the file, made her decision for the second time. She wasn't recusing herself. She was staying on this case, and she was going to rule based on what was actually best for Sophie Chen, conflict of interest or not. If it cost her career, so be it. Some things mattered more than self-preservation. Marcus made it through the first week by not thinking. He worked his shifts at Morrison's, picked up Sophie from school, helped with homework, made dinner, read bedtime stories, collapsed into bed exhausted enough that sleep came quickly. He avoided looking at the calendar, avoided counting down days, avoided Jennifer's carefully optimistic text messages. One day at a time. That's what Jennifer had said. That's what he tried to practice. But the fear was always there, lurking beneath everything. He'd catch himself watching Sophie, the way she hummed while coloring, the way she talked to Mr. Whiskers, like he could answer back, the way she trusted absolutely that her world was safe, and his chest would constrict with terror. What if this was it? What if these were his last days as her father? What if 2 weeks from now she'd be living in Teresa's house, sleeping in some decorator-perfect bedroom that didn't smell like home? Eating meals prepared by a stepfather who thought children should be seen and not heard. "Daddy, you're doing it again," Sophie said one evening. They were washing dishes together, her standing on a stool to reach the sink, him passing her plates to rinse. Doing what? The worried face. The one where your eyebrows scrunch up and you look like you're trying to solve a really hard math problem. She handed him a dripping plate. "Mrs. Kim says when adults have worried face, kids should ask if they want to talk about it." Marcus's throat tightened. "I'm okay, sweetheart. Just thinking about work." "Is it the court thing?" He should have known she'd figure it out. Sophie was too smart, too observant. She'd noticed the borrowed suit the early morning he'd left, the way Uncle Wei had taken her for ice cream in the middle of a school day. "Yeah," Marcus admitted. "It's the court thing." Sophie was quiet for a moment, scrubbing at a particularly stubborn spot on a bowl. "Are you and Mommy fighting about me?" Marcus's hands stilled. "No, baby. We're not fighting about you. We're trying to figure out what's best for you." "I know what's best for me," Sophie said, her voice very small. "I want to stay here, with you, in our apartment, with Mrs. Kim and Uncle Wei and my school and Emma." She looked up at him, eyes swimming with tears she was trying to blink back. "Do I get to tell the judge that—" "The judge is going to make the decision based on what she thinks is best." "But I'm 7. I should get a say. It's my life." Marcus lifted her off the stool, pulled her into a hug. She wrapped her arms around his neck and held on tight, and Marcus thought about all the nights he'd held her like this. When she was a baby crying from colic. When she was 2 and waking from nightmares. When she was 4 and had fallen off her bike. Every stage of her life he'd been there. He couldn't lose her. Couldn't imagine mornings without her, humming evenings, without homework battles, nights without her calling "Love you, Daddy" from her room. "I love you," he whispered into her hair. "More than anything in the whole world. You know that, right?" "I know," Sophie whispered back. "I love you too. More than chocolate ice cream, more than library days, more than anything." They stood like that for a long time, dishes, forgotten water running in the sink. The world outside continuing on, while their small corner of it felt suspended in amber. The second week was harder. Marcus made mistakes at work. Put the wrong oil in a customer's car, forgot to order parts, zoned out during a conversation with his supervisor. He apologized, fixed his errors, tried to focus. But his mind kept drifting to Catherine Walsh, sitting somewhere in her chambers, reviewing evidence and testimony and deciding his fate. Did she think about that night? About the rain and the broken battery terminal, and Marcus's refusal of payment? Or had it been just another forgettable moment in her life? While for Marcus, it had become this massive, impossible thing that he couldn't stop circling back to. Jennifer called on Wednesday with an update that wasn't really an update. "Nothing yet," she said. "Walsh's clerk says she's still reviewing. Could come tomorrow, could be Friday, could be early next week." "I thought she said 2 weeks. That's the outside limit. She could rule any time before then." Jennifer paused. "How are you holding up?" "I'm fine." Marcus. "I'm terrified," he admitted. "I'm barely sleeping. I keep thinking about what I'll say to Sophie if we lose. How I'll explain that the judge decided Teresa's bigger house matters more than our life together. That's not, isn't it though? That's what it comes down to. Money, space, the appearance of stability, and I can't compete with that." "You're competing with 2 years of actual parenting versus 2 years of absence," Jennifer said firmly. "That matters. Walsh will see that." Marcus wanted to believe her. Wanted to have faith that justice meant something, that the system worked, that character counted for more than checkbook balance. But he'd lived long enough to know the world didn't always work that way. Thursday afternoon, Marcus was under a Toyota Highlander changing oil when his phone rang. He almost didn't answer, was covered in grease, balanced on a creeper in the middle of a job. But something made him slide out, wipe his hands on a rag, check the screen. Jennifer Reeves. His heart stopped. "Hello." "Marcus." Jennifer's voice was strange, tight, emotional in a way he'd never heard from her. "Can you talk?" Yeah, I'm here." "What did she rule?" "She ruled." The world tilted. Marcus sat down hard on the garage floor, oil-stained concrete cold beneath him. "And you won." The words didn't process at first. Marcus heard them, but couldn't make them mean anything. Won. He'd won. Walsh had ruled in his favor. "Marcus, are you there?" "I'm here. What exactly did she say?" "I'm reading from the order now." Jennifer's voice steadied, went into lawyer mode. "After careful consideration of all testimony and evidence presented, this court finds that the minor child's best interests are served by maintaining the current custody arrangement. The respondent, Marcus Chen, has demonstrated consistent, engaged parenting. The child is thriving in his care. While the petitioner can provide certain material advantages, this court finds that emotional stability and continuity of care are paramount considerations in custody determinations." Marcus couldn't breathe, couldn't think, couldn't do anything but listen to Jennifer's voice reading words that meant Sophie was his, still his, would stay his. There's more, Jennifer continued. Walsh granted you sole legal custody. Teresa gets supervised visitation every other weekend, 4 hours per visit. No overnight stays until Sophie's therapist, and yes, Walsh-ordered family therapy determines it's appropriate. Marcus, this is a complete victory. Walsh didn't just maintain status quo, she restricted Teresa's access. Why? The word came out hoarse. Did she explain why? She cited the regression Sophie experiences after visits. The testimony from Mrs. Pemberton about Sophie's emotional state. The pattern of Teresa's absence followed by sudden renewed interest. Walsh wrote, and I'm quoting here, "This court will not reward a parent's abandonment by granting increased custody. Children are not possessions to be reclaimed when convenient. They are human beings deserving of stability, consistency, and unwavering love. The respondent has provided all three. The petitioner has provided none." Marcus's vision blurred. He pressed his palm against the concrete, needed something solid to anchor him. "Marcus, you okay?" Yeah, I'm..." His voice broke. He couldn't finish the sentence. "Take your time. This is a lot. Can Teresa appeal?" "She can try, but Walsh's order is thorough. She addressed every argument Cross made, supported every conclusion with specific evidence. This will be hard to overturn." Jennifer's voice softened. "Go pick up your daughter. Tell her she's staying home. Celebrate. You did it. You both did it." Marcus ended the call with shaking hands, stood on unsteady legs. His supervisor, Tony, appeared in the garage bay entrance, took one look at Marcus's face and smiled. "Good news." "The best. Can I leave early? I need to get Sophie." "Go. Get out of here. And Marcus." Tony's voice caught. "Congratulations. She's a lucky kid." Marcus barely remembered the drive to Brightwood Elementary. He arrived 20 minutes before dismissal, parked in the lot, watched parents gathering by the doors. Other mothers and fathers here to collect their children, taking for granted something Marcus had almost lost. The bell rang. Kids poured out in their usual chaotic flood of backpacks and noise. Marcus scanned the crowd, spotted Sophie emerging with Emma, both of them laughing about something. She hadn't seen him yet. Was just a 7-year-old girl walking out of school, unaware that her father had spent 2 weeks in agony, wondering if he'd ever do this again. "Sophie," he called. She turned, saw him, and her face lit up. "Daddy, you're early." She ran to him, and Marcus caught her, lifted her up, even though she was getting too big for it, held her tight, while other parents and kids flowed around them. "What's wrong?" Sophie asked, pulling back to study his face. "Why are you crying?" "Happy tears," Marcus managed. The judge made her decision. "You're staying with me. You're staying home." Sophie's eyes went wide. "Really, like forever?" "Like forever. You're not going anywhere." "I knew it." Sophie threw her arms around his neck again. "I knew the judge would see you're the best daddy. Mrs. Kim said judges are smart like that. She was right." Marcus buried his face in Sophie's hair, held his daughter, and let himself break apart with relief and gratitude and overwhelming love. 2 weeks of terror dissolved in this single perfect moment. They drove home in celebration mode, stopped for pizza, the good kind from Antonio's that they could never usually afford. Sophie chattered the entire drive, making plans for the weekend, talking about a science project she wanted to start, asking if Emma could sleep over next Friday. Normal. Everything was normal again. No more counting down days. No more wondering if their time together had an expiration date. Just life. Regular, messy, beautiful life. Mrs. Kim was waiting when they got home, standing outside her store, and Marcus knew someone had called her. Probably Uncle Wei, who was somehow always connected to every piece of family news before anyone officially shared it. "So," Mrs. Kim said, looking at Marcus with knowing eyes. "The judge was smart, yes. The smartest." Marcus agreed. Mrs. Kim pulled him into a hug that smelled like ginger and tea. "I never doubted. Not for one moment." That night, after pizza and ice cream, and Sophie's longest bedtime routine ever, because she suddenly had so many things to tell him, so many thoughts to share, Marcus finally had a moment alone. He stood in their tiny kitchen, exhausted and overwhelmed, and still not quite believing it was over. His phone buzzed. A text from Jennifer. Jennifer. Forgot to mention Walsh's clerk called. The judge wants to see you. Tomorrow at 4 p.m. Her chambers. Marcus stared at the message, his stomach dropping. Wants to see him. Why the case was decided. The order was issued. What could Catherine Walsh possibly need to say to him now? Marcus, is that normal? Jennifer, no, but nothing about this case has been normal. Want me to come with you? Marcus, no, I'll go alone. He set the phone down, mind racing. Maybe Walsh wanted to explain her reasoning. Maybe there were conditions she hadn't included in the written order. Maybe she planned to recuse herself now that the hard part was done, hand future modifications to another judge. Or maybe she wanted to acknowledge what they both knew but couldn't say in court. That a random act of kindness on a rainy highway had changed everything. Marcus didn't sleep well that night. When he did manage to drift off, he dreamed of rain and hazard lights, and a voice asking if he knew where to find battery terminals. Marcus arrived at the courthouse 15 minutes early, wearing the same borrowed suit he'd worn to the hearing. His hands were clean this time, scrubbed free of motor oil, nails trimmed. He'd even stopped at a barber shop on his lunch break, gotten a proper haircut for the first time in months. Not that appearances mattered. Now the case was decided, Sophie was his. But some part of him wanted Catherine Walsh to see him at his best. Or maybe he just wanted to look like someone worthy of the risk she'd taken. The security guards waved him through with barely a glance. He was familiar now, another face in the rotating cast of people whose lives intersected with the justice system. Marcus took the stairs instead of the elevator, needing the physical activity to burn off nervous energy. By the time he reached the third floor, his heart was racing from more than exertion. Walsh's clerk, a young woman named Rachel with kind eyes and efficient movements, greeted him outside the chambers. Mr. Chen, Judge Walsh is expecting you. Go ahead in. Marcus's hand hesitated on the door handle. Beyond this door was the woman who'd saved him twice. Once on a rainy highway. Once in a courtroom. He had no idea what to say to her, how to thank her, how to even begin acknowledging what she'd done. He knocked, twice heard her voice call, "Come in," and pushed the door open. Catherine Walsh sat behind her desk, out of her judicial robes, now wearing a simple gray sweater and reading glasses perched on her nose. She looked tired, Marcus thought. The kind of tired that came from carrying weight no one else could see. Mr. Chen, she said, gesturing to the chair across from her. Please sit. Marcus sat, hands folded in his lap to keep them from shaking. Your Honor, I'm not sure why you wanted to see me. I wanted to talk to you off the record, away from attorneys and court reporters and the formal machinery of law. She removed her glasses, set them on the desk between them. What I'm about to say cannot leave this room. Do you understand? Yes. I mean it, Marcus. Her use of his first name felt significant, intimate even. If what I tell you becomes public knowledge, my career is over. Possibly my law license. I'm trusting you with something I shouldn't share. Marcus's mouth went dry. Maybe you shouldn't then. Maybe we should just... I recognized you the moment I walked into that courtroom, Catherine said, cutting through his protest. The second I saw your face, I knew exactly who you were. The man who fixed my car, who refused payment, who told me about the auto parts store and said his mother would haunt him if he left someone stranded. The air in the room felt too thin. Marcus struggled to breathe normally. I should have recused myself immediately, Catherine continued. The ethical course of action was clear. I had personal contact with one party in the case. That's grounds for automatic removal. Any attorney worth their degree would have demanded it. Then why didn't you? Marcus's voice came out rough. Why risk everything? Catherine walked to the window overlooking downtown Hartford. The afternoon sun caught her silver hair, made her look both younger and more vulnerable than she'd appeared on the bench. Because I knew what would happen if I did. Judge Morrison would have gotten your case, and Morrison has a 94% custody modification approval rate when the petitioning parent has more money. He believes children need financial stability above all else. He would have given Sophie to your ex-wife without a second thought. You couldn't have known that for certain. I've worked alongside Morrison for 10 years. I know exactly how he thinks, how he rules, what he values. She turned back to face Marcus. And I knew it would be wrong. The evidence was clear. Sophie is thriving with you. Everything in that case file pointed to you being the better parent. But Morrison wouldn't have cared about that. He would have seen a two-parent household with money and decided that was enough. Marcus felt something crack open in his chest. So you kept the case, knowing you shouldn't, knowing it could destroy your career. I kept the case because letting you lose when you shouldn't have would have destroyed something more important than my career. It would have destroyed my faith that justice means anything at all. Catherine's voice went quiet. I became a judge because I believed in the system, believed that if we followed the rules and applied the law fairly, we could achieve something close to truth. But somewhere along the way, I'd started to doubt that, started to see how often the system fails people who deserve better. She moved back to her desk, sat down heavily. And then I met you. In the middle of my worst professional day, when I was stranded and helpless and angry at the world, you stopped. You didn't know me, didn't know I was a judge or that I had any power or influence. You just saw someone who needed help, and you gave it. Catherine's eyes met his directly. That meant something to me. Reminded me that character still exists, that some people still do the right thing, even when it costs them. It didn't cost me anything, Marcus said. Just 10 minutes and some elbow grease. It cost you being late to your daughter. You were already exhausted, already struggling, already carrying more than any person should have to carry, and you stopped anyway. Catherine leaned forward. So when your case landed on my desk, when I realized I had the power to either do the right thing or protect my career, I thought about you standing in the rain, about the choice you made when you could have just kept driving. Marcus's throat was too tight to speak. I'm not telling you this for gratitude, Catherine said. I'm telling you because you deserve to know. The decision I made wasn't impartial, wasn't ethically sound. It was a judge letting personal knowledge influence a ruling, which is exactly what we're sworn not to do. She paused. But it was the right decision. For Sophie. For you. For what justice actually means, even if it violates what justice is supposed to look like on paper. You could lose everything, Marcus managed. If anyone finds out, they won't. As long as you keep this conversation between us, no one ever has to know. Your ex-wife has grounds to appeal, but my written order is solid. I was careful to support every conclusion with courtroom evidence. There's nothing in the official record that references our prior meeting. Marcus stared at this woman who'd held his fate in her hands, who'd violated her oath to protect him, who sat here now vulnerable and honest, trusting him with a truth that could end her. Why are you telling me? He asked. Why not just let it be? I won. Sophie's safe. We could have just never spoken about it. Because you deserve to know why, Catherine said simply. And because I needed to say it out loud to someone. I've been carrying this decision for 2 weeks, wondering if I did the right thing, if my justifications were sound, or just convenient excuses. I needed to tell someone who would understand what it cost. She was lonely, Marcus realized. This powerful woman with her impressive career and her chambers full of law books, she was lonely. Had been carrying this weight alone just like Marcus had been carrying his. Thank you. Marcus said the words inadequate, but all he had. For everything. For stopping Morrison from getting the case. For seeing past the paperwork. For... His voice broke. For letting me keep my daughter. You kept your daughter, Catherine corrected. I just made sure the system didn't take her away for the wrong reasons. She picked up a file from her desk, handed it across to him. This is information about family therapists in the area. Sophie should talk to someone about everything she's been through. The custody battle, her mother's absence, the uncertainty. Even though it ended well, children internalize trauma. Marcus took the file, flipped through pages of names and credentials and specialties. I can't afford. There's a clinic on Farmington Avenue. They work on a sliding scale. Some sessions are as low as $20. Catherine's voice gentled. Sophie is resilient. But resilience doesn't mean children should have to process things alone. Get her someone to talk to, someone who isn't you or Mrs. Kim or Uncle Wei, someone whose job is just to listen. Okay? Marcus nodded. I'll call them Monday. They sat in silence for a moment, the weight of everything said and unsaid hanging between them. Marcus thought about that night on Route 44, how he'd stood in the rain wondering if stopping would matter, how he'd never imagined that 10 minutes with a stranger would change both their lives. What happens now? He asked finally. With the case, I mean. Are you staying on as the judge if anything else comes up? For now, yes. Unless your ex-wife discovers our connection and files a motion, I'll remain the presiding judge on any future modifications. Catherine's expression grew stern. But Marcus, I need you to understand something. Today was off the record. If we ever end up in court again, if Teresa files for modification, if there are future custody issues, I can't show you any favoritism. I'll have to rule based solely on evidence. Do you understand? I understand? I'm serious. What I did was already far beyond what I should have allowed. I won't let personal feeling influence another ruling. If circumstances change, if Teresa demonstrates real change and consistent involvement, I'll have to consider that fairly. I wouldn't want you to do anything else, Marcus said honestly. What you did, keeping the case ruling on the actual evidence that was justice. If there's a next time, I'll deserve whatever judgment comes. Catherine studied him, seemed satisfied with what she saw. You're a good father, Marcus. Keep being that. Keep showing up for Sophie. Keep being the man who stops in the rain. She stood, signaling the meeting's end. And if you ever see me broken down on the side of the road again, feel free to keep driving. I'll understand. Marcus stood too, managed a small smile. My mother would still haunt me. Some things don't change. Then I hope I keep my car maintained. Catherine extended her hand and Marcus shook it, feeling the firmness of her grip, the weight of everything this handshake represented. Take care of yourself. Take care of Sophie. And Marcus. You don't owe me anything. What I did because it was right, not because I expected gratitude. I'm grateful anyway. He left her chambers, walked through the courthouse, emerged into afternoon sunlight that felt different than it had an hour ago. The world was the same traffic, same people rushing past, same Hartford skyline, but Marcus's place in it had shifted. He was a father with custody, a man whose kindness had been repaid, someone who'd witnessed a judge choose conscience over career and been trusted with that secret. His phone buzzed as he reached his car. A text from Sophie. Sophie. Mrs. Kim is teaching me to make dumplings. They are hard, but also fun. Are you coming home soon? Marcus typed back quickly. On my way now. Save some dumplings for me. Sophie. Only if you promise to tell me what the judge wanted to talk about. Marcus, deal, but the answer might disappoint you. It was boring legal stuff. Sophie. Nothing about my case is boring, Daddy. I lived it. Marcus smiled, pocketed his phone, drove home through rush hour traffic. When he arrived at the apartment, he could smell Mrs. Kim's cooking from the stairwell ginger and pork, and the particular scent of steaming dough. Sophie's laughter echoed down, mixing with Mrs. Kim's patient instructions. This was his life. This small apartment above a grocery store. This 7-year-old who wanted to make dumplings and asked too many questions and trusted absolutely that tomorrow would come with him in it. He'd almost lost this. had spent 2 weeks wondering if some judge would decide it wasn't enough that Sophie deserved better than a struggling father in a cramped space. But Catherine Walsh had seen what mattered, had recognized that love couldn't be measured in square footage or bank balances. That Sophie's gap-toothed smile and her father's oil-stained hands added up to something more valuable than Teresa's 4-bedroom house. "Daddy!" Sophie launched herself at him the moment he walked through the door, leaving flower handprints on his borrowed suit. "Look, I made 6 dumplings all by myself. Mrs. Kim says they're wonky, but wonky is good because it means I'm learning." "Wonky is perfect," Marcus said, hugging her tight. "How's the teacher?" Mrs. Kim appeared from the kitchen, wiping her hands on her apron. "The teacher is tired. 7-year-olds ask many questions. Why do we fold it this way? Can we put chocolate inside? What if we make them really big?" But her eyes were fond, her smile genuine. "Did the judge say anything important?" Sophie asked, tugging Marcus toward the kitchen where a pot of dumplings was steaming. "Was she nice? Did she remember me from when I drew her that picture?" Marcus thought about Catherine Walsh sitting in her chamber's gray sweater and reading glasses, carrying secrets that could destroy her. Thought about her choosing justice over safety, character over career, the right thing over the easy thing. "She remembered you," Marcus said. "And yes, she was nice. She wanted to make sure we were okay. That you were happy." "I'm the happiest," Sophie declared. "And not just wonky happy. Really, really happy. The kind where you smile even when you don't mean to." "That's the best kind," Mrs. Kim said, ladling dumplings into bowls. "Now eat before they get cold. And Marcus, there's enough for Uncle Wei. He's coming over for dinner. Says he needs to hear about the meeting with the judge." Of course Wei was coming. Family always showed up when it mattered. That was something Marcus had learned young, something his mother had taught him before she died. Family wasn't just blood. It was the people who stayed, who helped fold wonky dumplings and watched 7-year-olds and celebrated victories and held you together when everything fell apart. They ate dinner crowded around Marcus's small kitchen table, him and Sophie and Mrs. Kim and Wei, when he arrived 20 minutes later with a bottle of wine and a bag of Sophie's favorite cookies. They talked about nothing important and everything essential. Sophie's science project, Mrs. Kim's new shipment of Korean snacks, Wei's latest dating disaster, normal life, regular life, the life Marcus got to keep living. Later, after Mrs. Kim and Wei had gone home and Sophie was tucked into bed with Mr. Whiskers, Marcus stood in his tiny living room and let himself feel the full weight of the past 2 weeks. The fear, the uncertainty, the desperate hope, and now the overwhelming gratitude. He pulled out his phone, typed out a text to Catherine Walsh before he could overthink it. "Marcus, thank you for everything you said today, for trusting me with the truth, for being the kind of person who does the right thing even when it costs you. My mother would have liked you." He hesitated, then added, "If you're ever broken down on the side of the road again, I promise I'll stop. Some things don't change." He hit send before he could reconsider. Knew it was probably inappropriate to text a judge. Knew she might not even have given him her personal number. But he needed her to know that he understood, that he saw her choice for what it was, that her risk hadn't been for nothing. His phone buzzed 5 minutes later. "Catherine. Your mother sounds like she was a wise woman. Thank you for stopping that night, and for reminding me why I became a judge in the first place. Take care of Sophie. She's lucky to have you. Catherine. And Marcus, keep doing what you're doing. Keep being kind even when you're exhausted. Keep helping people even when it's inconvenient. The world needs more people like you." Marcus read the message 3 times, then set his phone down. Checked on Sophie one more time. She was asleep, breathing deeply. Mr. Whiskers tucked under her chin. Safe. Home. His. He thought about sliding doors, about moments that changed everything. If he hadn't stopped that night. If Catherine Walsh hadn't been the judge assigned to his case. If she'd chosen career over conscience. How different everything would be. But he had stopped. She had been the judge. She had chosen right over safe. And now Sophie got to wake up tomorrow in her own bed in her own home, with her father making breakfast and cutting sandwiches diagonal because triangles tasted better. The next morning, Saturday, Marcus woke to Sophie singing in the kitchen. He found her attempting to make pancakes, batter everywhere, her hair dusted with flour. "I wanted to surprise you," she said, surveying the disaster with complete pride. "I'm not very good at it yet, but wonky is good. Remember." Marcus hugged her, flour and all. "Wonky is perfect. Let's make them together." They cooked side by side, Sophie chattering about Emma's upcoming birthday party and a book she'd finished about astronauts, and could they maybe go to the Science Museum next weekend because they had a new space exhibit. "We can do that," Marcus said. "We can do anything you want." "Anything." Sophie's eyes went wide. "Can we get a puppy? Let's start with the Science Museum and work our way up to puppies." "That's parent talk for ask me again in 6 months," Sophie said wisely. "Mrs. Kim taught me that. She says adults never mean no immediately. They say maybe and hope you forget." "Mrs. Kim is too smart for her own good. She says the same thing about me." Sophie flipped a pancake with exaggerated care. "Daddy, are you going to be happy now, like really happy now that the court thing is over?" Marcus turned off the stove, gave Sophie his full attention. "I'm already happy, baby girl. I've been happy as long as I've had you." "But you were scared. I could tell. You had the worried face for weeks." "I was scared," Marcus admitted. "Scared of losing you. But that's over now. We're okay. We're going to stay okay." Sophie studied him with those two wise eyes. "The judge helped us, didn't she? That's why you went to see her yesterday." "Yeah, she helped us." "Then when I'm older and I see someone who needs help, I should stop and help them, even if I'm tired or busy, because you never know when helping someone might save everything." Marcus's eyes stung. "That's exactly right." "Good." Sophie returned her attention to the pancakes. "I'm going to be like you and the judge. I'm going to help people, and I'm going to be an astronaut, and maybe also a veterinarian so I can help animals too. Is that too many jobs?" "You can be anything you want, Sophie. Anything at all." They ate their wonky pancakes at the kitchen table, syrup everywhere, and Marcus thought about legacy. About what he was teaching his daughter. Not through lectures or rules, but through action. Through stopping in the rain. Through fighting for what mattered. Through showing up every single day, even when exhausted. His phone buzzed. A text from Jennifer. Jennifer. Teresa's attorney filed notice. "She's not appealing. It's really over, Marcus. Congratulations." Marcus stared at the message. Not appealing. Teresa was letting it go. Whether that meant she'd accepted defeat, or simply didn't want to spend more money on lawyers, Marcus didn't know. Didn't matter. The result was the same. It was over. Really, truly over. "Good news?" Sophie asked, watching him. "The best news. Your mom isn't going to ask the court to change the judge's decision. Everything stays exactly as it is." Sophie nodded seriously. "Good. I like exactly as it is." Then her face brightened. "Does this mean we can celebrate? Can we go to the library, and then get ice cream, and then go to the park? We can do all of that. And can Emma come?" "Sure. Call her after breakfast." Sophie whooped, knocked over her orange juice in her excitement, apologized through giggles while helping clean up. Normal chaos. Normal joy. The kind of morning Marcus had been terrified he'd never have again. They spent the day exactly as Sophie had planned, library first, where Sophie checked out her maximum 7 books, and Marcus found a thriller he'd been wanting to read. Then ice cream at the place with the 20 flavors. Then the park where Sophie and Emma played on the swings, while Marcus sat on a bench and watched. Other parents surrounded him, dealing with their own kids, their own lives, their own private struggles. Marcus wondered how many of them had stories like his, How many had faced losing everything and been saved by impossible coincidence, or judicial courage, or random acts of kindness, rippling forward in ways no one could predict? His phone buzzed again. Another text from Catherine Walsh. Marcus almost didn't check it. They'd said everything that needed saying. But curiosity won. Catherine. I heard Teresa's not appealing. I'm glad. You and Sophie deserve peace. Enjoy your weekend. Marcus typed back. We're at the park. Sophie's on the swings. She's laughing. Thank you for making sure this moment exists. Catherine. You made sure it exists. By being the kind of father worth fighting for. I just removed obstacles. Marcus pocketed his phone, watched his daughter play. Thought about the chain of events that had led here. His mother teaching him to help people. That rainy night on Route 44. Catherine Walsh's impossible choice. All of it connecting like dominoes, falling in exactly the right direction. Sophie ran over breathless and happy. Daddy, Emma's mom says she can sleep over tonight if it's okay with you. Can she? Please. Sure. As long as her mom's really okay with it. I'm really okay with it. Emma's mother Linda called from across the playground. I could use a quiet evening. You're a saint for taking them both. Hardly a saint, Marcus said. Just a dad who likes seeing his kid happy. Well, you're doing a good job of it. Sophie's lucky. Lucky. That word again. But it wasn't luck, Marcus thought. It was choice. His choice to stop on a rainy highway. Catherine's choice to stay on his case. The daily choice to keep showing up for Sophie even when everything was hard. Luck was random. Choice was character. That night, after Sophie and Emma had finally fallen asleep in Sophie's room following hours of giggling and whispered conversation, Marcus sat alone in his living room. The apartment was quiet except for the hum of the refrigerator and occasional car passing outside. He thought about texting Catherine Walsh again, but decided against it. They'd said enough. Had acknowledged the impossible situation and come out the other side intact. Some things didn't need to be examined further. Instead, Marcus pulled out his laptop and looked up the family therapy clinic Catherine had recommended. Read through their services, their approach, their sliding scale fees. Made a mental note to call Monday and schedule Sophie's first appointment. Then he opened a new document and began typing. He wasn't sure why exactly. Maybe because the past 2 weeks had been too large to keep contained in his head. Maybe because Sophie would want to know the full story someday. Maybe just because writing it down made it feel real. He titled it, The Night I Stopped, and started with the rain, the exhaustion, the moment he'd seen hazard lights and made the choice to pull over. Wrote about fixing the battery terminal, about Catherine Walsh's gratitude, about refusing payment, and driving away, thinking it was just another forgettable moment. Then he wrote about the courtroom. The recognition. The impossible coincidence. The 2 weeks of uncertainty. Catherine's ruling. Her chamber's confession. The risk she'd taken. He wrote about Sophie's wonky dumplings and Mrs. Kim's wisdom and Uncle Way's loyalty. About Jennifer's fierce advocacy and Mrs. Pemberton's careful observations. About all the people who'd surrounded him and Sophie, creating a net of support that had kept them from falling too far. He wrote until his eyes burned and his fingers cramped, until the story was told as fully as he could tell it. Then he saved the document with a password only he knew, closed his laptop, and checked on Sophie one more time. She and Emma were tangled together in sleep limbs overlapping Mr. Whiskers squashed between them. The nightlight cast soft shadows across their faces. 2 7-year-olds dreaming whatever 7-year-olds dreamed, safe and warm and loved. This was what Catherine Walsh had protected, not just Marcus's rights as a father, not just legal precedent or judicial ethics, but this specific moment. These specific children sleeping in this specific room. The particular sound of Sophie's breathing and the way Emma's hand curled against the pillow. Marcus stood in the doorway for a long time memorizing it. Then he went to his own room, crawled into bed, and slept dreamlessly for the first time in months. Sunday morning brought rain. Not the torrential downpour of that night on Route 44, just steady November drizzle. Marcus made breakfast while Sophie and Emma did cartwheels in the living room. Linda came to pick Emma up at 10, thanking Marcus profusely and promising reciprocal sleepovers. After Emma left, Sophie curled up on the couch with one of her library books. Marcus sat beside her, his own thriller open but unread. Sometimes just being in the same space was enough. Sometimes proximity was its own form of love. "Daddy," Sophie said without looking up from her book, "when I'm grown up, I'm going to tell people about you. About how you fought for me. About how you never gave up." Marcus's throat tightened. "You don't have to do that, sweetheart." "I want to, though, because other kids should know that some dads are really good. That some dads stop in the rain and help people and fight in court and make wonky pancakes." She looked up at him, her expression serious beyond her years. "You're one of the good ones, Daddy. Everyone should know that." Marcus pulled her close, kissed the top of her head. "You're one of the good ones too, baby girl. The very best." They sat like that for a while, rain pattering against the windows, the apartment warm and quiet around them. Outside, Hartford went about its Sunday business. People shopping, visiting family, dealing with their own dramas and joys. Somewhere in the city, Catherine Walsh was perhaps sitting in her own home, carrying her secret living with her choice. Somewhere Teresa was adjusting to defeat, to limited visitation, to consequences of abandonment. Somewhere other families were fighting their own custody battles, hoping for judges who would see clearly. But in this moment, in this small apartment above a Korean grocery, Marcus Chen and Sophie Chen had everything they needed. Each other. Safety. Home. The kind of peace that came from surviving something terrible and coming out whole on the other side. Sophie's voice interrupted his thoughts. "I think it's going to stop raining soon. Can we go to Uncle Way's? He promised to teach me card tricks." "Sure. Let's wait for the rain to ease up, then we'll go." Okay. Sophie returned to her book, completely content to wait, trusting that when Marcus said they'd go, they would. That trust was everything. That was what the custody battle had been about, really. Not legal rights or financial capability or any other abstract concept. Just this. A child's absolute faith that her father would keep his promises, would be there when he said he would choose her again and again no matter what it cost. And Marcus would keep choosing her, would keep stopping in the rain for strangers, would keep being the man his mother had raised him to be. Because character wasn't about big moments or grand gestures. It was about showing up, about fixing battery terminals in the pouring rain, about helping when it was inconvenient, about doing the right thing even when no one was watching. His mother had taught him that. Catherine Walsh had remembered it, and now Sophie would carry it forward. The rain slowed, then stopped. Weak sunlight broke through clouds, turning wet pavement silver. Sophie looked up from her book, smiled at her father. "Ready?" she asked. "Ready." Marcus agreed. They grabbed jackets, locked the apartment, headed down the stairs, and out into the clean-washed world. Together. The way they'd always been. The way they'd always be. And somewhere in Hartford, Catherine Walsh received a text she'd been half hoping for, half dreading. "Marcus, thank you, for everything, for seeing what mattered, for being brave. My mother was right. Character is what you do when everything's falling apart. You have character, Judge Walsh. I hope you never forget that." She read it twice, smiled, then deleted it. Some conversations existed outside official records. Some moments of grace couldn't be documented or preserved or proven. They could only be lived, remembered, and carried forward. Catherine looked out her window at the rain-clean streets, thought about Marcus Chen and his daughter, and the choice she'd made. She'd violated her oath, had let personal knowledge influence a judicial decision, had risked everything she'd built, and she'd do it again in a heartbeat. Because justice wasn't always about following rules. Sometimes it was about knowing when to break them, about seeing clearly when the system was blind, about choosing conscience over career and trusting that the choice was right even if the rules said otherwise. She'd become a judge to serve justice. And in Marcus Chen's case, she finally had. That was enough. That would always be enough.